Welcome back, everyone. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to Dani Loftus. Dani last year was the person who schooled me on all things metaverse. And she's here to tell us a little bit about her adventures, as well as the state of, I can't even speak anymore. But actually, Dani, where are you?
So I'm currently in Mexico City.
See, I get to live vicariously through you. I leave you to tell us everything that you know, and thank you so much for doing this masterclass. It's wonderful for everybody, for all of those people who have no idea what the metaverse is, which is basically me included, and all of this crypto stuff and everything else that is like linked to that and gaming. We basically have you to explain everything to us. So I leave you to it. Have a really wonderful masterclass, and I will be watching you on YouTube.
Thank you so much for having me, Janice. Hi, everyone. For the next 45 minutes, I am going to be running you through what I see as my masterclass on the state of next generation fashion. So what we're going to be talking about today is the digitally native fashion industry, why it exists, what it is, who the people are who both wear it and create it, and then finally, where we're moving from here. Before I start, I wanted to tell you a little bit about me and why I'm the one giving you this course. So my name is Dani, and I am the founder of originally a content platform called This Outfit Does Not Exist. And this is a really important, 45 minutes to conduct for me, because I fell down the digital fashion rabbit hole in 2020, so 2 years ago now. And I think sharing the reasons that I was compelled to look into digital fashion and now to build my career around it will hopefully also be eye-opening and compelling for you. So I grew up absolutely loving fashion. However, I ended up pursuing a path in emerging tech, and it got to midway through the pandemic, and like a lot of us, I was sitting on my sofa by myself, and I followed fashion tech quite closely, and I also followed the gaming space quite closely. And my job at that point was going into FTSE 100 companies and saying, here's how emerging technology is going to change your industry, and here's how you should respond. But I'd never, ever been staffed on any project to do with fashion, even though my entire social life, my entire personal pursuits were around the industry. So I'm sitting on my sofa and I read an article where Gucci said that they're going to start designing clothes to be worn solely digitally. And it completely clicked to my head. I was looking at this world of the creator economy where 50 million people earn a living through social media. And I think, like a lot of us, my whole life was social media based at that point. And all of a sudden, it was this idea that clothes could be produced digitally, making them hyper-sustainable, more economically efficient for businesses. And I saw our digital identities develop and grow. And so I expected to see a ton of people working in this industry, a ton of Instagram accounts when I started Googling. And there was almost nothing. And so I started This Outfit Does Not Exist as a way to educate people around the industry and why it was going to be the future. And so I would write these 5,000 word essays on that. And then I would also post photos of myself wearing the clothing to bring it to life in, let's say, the aesthetic imagination. And that started as my side hustle in January of 2021. And the entire industry blew up in February, March with the NFT and digital asset boom. And I was fortunate to become one of the leading figures in the movement. I now also act as an investor in the digital fashion space through an investment vehicle called Red DAO. And so we own everything from the Dolce & Gabbana Doge crown, so the most expensive digital fashion purchase ever made, to young emerging designers. And we're really trying to foster the ecosystem through the work that we do. And then finally, I am the founder and CEO of a platform called DRAUP, which I'll speak to you about a little bit later. But essentially, the purpose of what DRAUP is doing is really trying to expand the consumer base of digital fashion by bringing both the most talented creators who are digitally native and brands, and also creating the infrastructure for a fully formed consumer experience in the digital fashion space. But enough about me. To begin with, let's talk about digital fashion and why it's so pertinent and important right now. So, over the past 2 years, the fashion industry has moved from one of the most notorious digital laggards to an industry thrust into the digital realm. During the pandemic, between 2019 and 2020, e-com sales almost doubled. And now we exist in a state where there are these consistent pressures to move into the metaverse, into fully virtual realms, in order to, on the one hand, target a new generation of consumers, but on the other hand, just keep up with the Joneses, and the Joneses being these new digitally native brands. Before we talk about digital fashion, I want to just first of all talk about fashion and think about fashion as an entire business in and of itself. It's a $3 trillion industry. There are 80 billion new items consumed each year, and it's one of the fashion and textile industry is the 4th largest in the world, and it's 2% of total GDP, which I think really breaks down this question. Why? Why is it such a large industry? One of the things and one of the ways that we've evolved since industrialization is that we no longer consume clothes because we need to keep warm. We need to have our bodies protected. It's now all of the additional functions of fashion. So it's the conveyance of our identities. And I think if you really break down why we shop in relation to this idea of identity, there are 3 core reasons. Firstly, we shop to self-express. We wear the clothes that we wear to show those around us who we are. And then within that, there are 2 other categories. The first of which is affiliation. So we dress the way that we dress to show the groups that we would like to be associated with. And I think that's very much why we consume brand. But even the styles or the trends that you engage with. Yes, you're going to wear something because it fits your body nicely, but it's also because it says a certain thing about who you are. And then finally, it's this idea of showing status. So if we think about this idea of brand, you're not only showing I'm affiliated with a certain group because of the brand I wear, you're also showing, maybe by the exclusivity of the item within the larger brand's collection, the status that you hold within that group of people who appreciate the way that you dress. So that's the core reason that we consume fashion. Fashion is in not the business of clothing, but the business of identity. And so I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to read the quote on the screen. "60% of Gen Z and 62% of millennials thinks how you present online is more important than how you present in person." This is slightly startling. And the first time that I saw this, I was mind blown. If it would have been that there was parity between these digital identities and our physical identities, that would have been one thing. But the idea that digital presence for the majority of millennials and Gen Z is more important than our physical lives, for me, was mind-blowing. But I think if you drill into this, digital identities are not something that we're going to see emerging in the next 5 years. They're not contingent on Facebook's movement into Meta or all of the things that we've heard over the past couple of years around the metaverse. They're actually things that are present right now. And the way that I see it, they're present in 2 distinct ways. The first way is what I call curated digital identities. And so these are the digital identities that 99% of us put out there through social media. When we use social platforms, everything from Twitter to LinkedIn to TikTok to Instagram, what we're doing is we're taking snippets of our physical lives, we're curating them, and then we're putting them online onto these digital platforms to express who we are. And unsurprisingly, there are 4.7 billion social media users. The second type, which is a far more emergent category, I call created digital identities. And so if you take this first category of Web2 social media, and I'll go a little bit into what Web2 or Web3 means, but the large platforms that we engage with, like Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, etc., that I expressed before. We now have these new platforms which don't rely on our physical lives at all. So instead of selecting moments and curating them, you are creating yourself, the way that you look, how you self-express, and the moments that you engage with digitally from the bottom up. And this category right now is mostly pervasive through gaming. So we've seen gaming as a vertical completely take off over the past 3 to 5 years. We are now at a place where there are 3.3 billion gamers. And this ranges from casual gamers who, let's say may play Candy Crush on their phone, to gamers who engage with platforms like Fortnite, platforms like Roblox. And in those platforms, you're engaging as an avatar. So you're engaging in a fully creative digital version of yourself. And then, of course, this brings us to the third category, which is this emerging category, which is the metaverse. So the metaverse, I would define as an overarching digital layer to our physical realities. And so that means that it's not only a fully digital layer where you're only immersing yourself through virtual reality or through games. It's also AR components. It will also be interactive experiences where you're pulled in the physical world to specific locations which correspond to a virtual realm. One of my favorite examples was a couple of years ago where Starbucks did a partnership with Pokemon Go. And there was a specific Pokemon which you would only be able to find in specific Starbucks stores where you could buy a specific drink. So for me, this was a very interesting cohesion between the physical and digital space. And we're also going to see more and more of those going forward. And so we have seen in the first 5 months of 2022, $120 billion invested in metaverse technology. And of course, I'm sure a lot of you saw that Facebook rebranded as Meta, which also shows that we're going to be moving into these social media networks, which instead of being based on our curated versions of our physical lives, will be directly avatar-based, so fully digital. And so we have a very strong connection to digital identity right now, which in the next few years is only going to increase and become more and more essential and more prevalent. And so this brings us on to digital fashion. So if you resonate with what I initially said, which is that fashion is in the business of identity, and increasingly our identities are becoming more and more digitally driven, it makes complete sense that digital fashion is going to be this burgeoning and increasingly growing market. But what actually is digital fashion? The way that I define it, digital fashion is just quite simply any worn garment created in the digital realm. And it falls into 3 forms. The first one is IRL, in real life digital fashion. The second one is ORL, or Unreal Life Digital Fashion. And the third is URL, or Unreal Life Digital Fashion. So let me start by going a little bit deeper into those 3 categories. So IRL, in real life digital fashion, I recognize sounds very oxymoronic. However, it's quite simply any physical good with a digital counterpart. So this spans everything from technologies that Alvanon is really pioneering in, which is the facilitation of physical clothes, but produced digitally for increased efficiency. And companies like Burberry have also been working around this. But recently, we've also seen the idea of digital fashion linked to a physical counterpart. So recently, there was a drop by a digital fashion designer and influencer called G Money. And G Money created a series of 1,000 shirts for 0.3 ETH, which is roughly $400 to $600. And you would have this physical fashion item with a digital counterpart. And every time you wore that physical fashion garment, the technology within it would allow you to somehow be rewarded. And it corresponds to a digital piece. We've also seen companies like Artifact do that, where you buy a pair of digital sneakers, which are then forged or created in the physical world. And so what you're doing here is you're really seeing this cohesion between physical and digital identities. But if in reality, it's not that much of a differentiation from physical fashion, apart from you're starting to see increased efficiency from these various digital mechanisms, but also this degree of cohesion between how you physically and digitally express. So to recap, IRL is physical fashion with a digital counterpart. Secondly is ORL, or Unreal Life. And this is the category that really brought me into the industry. ORL is quite simply digital fashion worn on a physical human being. So in the two photos, you can see me dressed in an incredible digitally native designer called Tribute Brand. So the way that these photos were produced was there's a photo of me wearing a dress, and I sent it into Tribute Brand, and they rendered these digital dresses on top of my image. I was originally drawn in by these type of creators. They never create the garment in the physical, and I think however well rendered it is, you can kind of allude to that by the materials that are being used. But I really saw this as this immense opportunity for a hyper unsustainable creator economy to become more innovative and more environmentally conscious. And I also saw it as this very exciting opportunity for consumers to make more informed purchasing decisions. So the fashion industry obviously works on simulating and stimulating demand. So you're saying, okay, this is a new item of clothing, we'd like people to buy it, utilizing advertising, utilizing a degree of pressure for people to evolve their identities. And with digital fashion, you could appeal to that base instinct, but have people altering how they dress in the digital realm and then making more conscious purchasing decisions as a result around how they want to wear it physically. So Unreal Life encompasses these renders, and it also encompasses AR filters that companies like Snap are working on, companies like Instagram. And it is, again, to recap, quite simply, digital fashion worn on a physical human being. Now we come on to the final category, which is URL, or Unreal Life. And this idea of Unreal Life is digital fashion sold direct to avatar. So it's digital fashion worn on a digital representation. And this can span everything from avatars in games to picture full profiles on Twitter, which is a Bored Ape or a CryptoPunk. And this is a really fascinating market because I think it's a market that's going to proliferate colossally over the next 5 years as we move into increasing quantities of these created rather than curated digital identities. One of the most interesting things about Unreal Life is that, as I said before, you're not tethered to the biological form that you have in the physical world. So if you look into games like Fortnite and Roblox, and the market for in-game skins, or these Unreal Life assets, is currently a multi-billion-dollar market. What you're seeing is people who may have never previously engaged with the fashion industry because maybe it doesn't resonate with the way that they look, or maybe the places that they go to express themselves are not the places where they necessarily can wear high fashion garments. All of a sudden in these digital realms are engaging in entirely new ways. And my favorite example of this is what's known as default culture. So default culture is essentially this phenomenon that exists in Fortnite. And you can actually see on the screen some Fortnite skins in collaboration with Balenciaga. But essentially what a default culture is players in Fortnite who go in with the most basic or default skin have been shown to be actively chastised by other players for not wearing customized or advanced skins, aka customized or advanced digital fashion. And if you look closely into the demographic of Fortnite, it's not the same people who are sitting front row at Fashion Week. It's people who you can largely assume in their everyday lives do not care about how they dress or the way they wear. And yet you look onto YouTube and there are genres of videos called default culture or default shaming with millions and millions and millions of views. And for me, this really shows that this Unreal Life vertical will lead to an entirely new consumer base proliferating within the fashion space who may have never engaged with fashion traditionally. And so to summarize, Unreal Life is digital fashion worn on digital people. And it will, in my opinion, become the largest of these three categories as we move into the future. So very quickly, I wanted to give you a quick market breakdown. So when I initially started in digital fashion, there were 3 players only. We now have the situation where you have digital natives, so that is digital fashion designers who were not large incumbents in the physical fashion space, who are creating digitally native brands and who really are responding to the mediums and their own personal experiences. And their entire break-in is around this digital fashion. And so you have these IRL, you have them ORL, you have them ERL. What you also have is what I would call trad break-ins. So we've gone from a place where traditional fashion brands are laggards to this place where every single traditional fashion brand has interacted with digital fashion in some way. It could be making their design process more efficient using IRL tools. Prada recently did an IRL collaboration where they released specific shirts where you needed an NFT to own one. Same thing with Adidas. It could be ORL, where companies like Prada, Fendi, and Marc Jacobs are collaborating with applications like Snapchat to show their new designs digitally, to facilitate expansion to a new consumer base, and to facilitate virtual try-on. And then URL, we've seen Balenciaga do skins with Fortnite, Gucci do a very fascinating experience with Roblox, same with Hilfiger. And the final thing that we're seeing is a union between these digital natives and these trad break-ins. So one of the most fascinating things, and I think it really speaks to the nascence of the industry, is that a lot of large fashion houses are partnering up with companies that are 6 months, 8 months old in order to understand and target this digitally native audience. A great company called 10KTF, for example, which was founded by Beeple, amongst others, recently partnered with Gucci to do an experience where you could dress your picture for profile in Gucci clothing. And I think what's fascinating is everyone's looking for a roadmap into this industry, into a way to integrate with digital fashion. And we'll go into this in a little bit, but it's no longer just a hyper innovative technology that only a few young players are using. It's now something that's being seen as essential across all luxury fashion and all wider fashion businesses. And this brings us on really to the future of digital fashion. Where we are at the moment is the industry is 1 or 2 years old. Everybody is in a hyper experimental phase, and we're very, very nascent. So I wanted to briefly cover how I think it's going to evolve and what we really need to push digital fashion forward into something that is easy to use for traditional brands and businesses, and something that's also compelling to a consumer base. Because as fashion is in the business of identity, if the way that you dress does not signal anything about you, or if you do not have platforms to express who and what you are when you're wearing these clothing, it's essentially rendered redundant. So that brings me on to what I call the identity versus ownership dilemma. As I said before, digital fashion is in the business of identity. And therefore, it's crucial when you wear digital fashion that you can interact with others. We have these platforms currently, both in the ORL and the URL space, which facilitate this en masse, truly. So Fortnite has 80.4 million monthly active users. Roblox has 220 million. And obviously we have sites like Instagram and sites like TikTok, as AR further accelerates in how advanced it is, that really allow you to wear your digital clothes and have other people appreciate them and really have them as these vessels to express who you are in the same way that you do in the physical world. However, there is a very fundamental problem, and that is that the goods on these platforms are not owned by you. So in Fortnite, for example, a player spends an average of $108. And yet, if Fortnite went bust tomorrow, or if you wanted to move your clothes off platform, you have no ability to do that. In the same way, your ability to monetize, so resell, rent these garments, is capped if it is even available at all. And it's the same around modification. So I think you can essentially think of the digital fashion ecosystem as it pertains to being able to move on platforms where you can really go around and express who you are, to being stuck in a mall where you can buy an amazing outfit from the shop, but you can only wear it to show who you are to other mall goers. You can't take it outside of the mall. You can't take it into a different neighborhood. And you can only resell it through the original store that you bought it, and you cannot modify it. And if you think about that from the perspective of a physical fashion consumer, it's not particularly compelling. And that moves us into what is known as Web3. Web3 is the solution to this problem because on the absolute most simple level, it allows digital fashion to be ownable, tradable, monetizable, and modifiable. But what exactly is Web3? Web3 is the third evolution of web technologies, and it incorporates concepts such as decentralization, blockchain, token-based economics. Over the past year and a half, the idea of NFT, or a non-fungible token, has been everywhere, it's boomed, and I think there are both positive and negative connotations of it now. Quite simply though, what it means is it's a good that is traceable and stored on a blockchain. And what it facilitates for fashion is these four components, which at the very, very least, give digital fashion the same utility and the same abilities that you would expect from a physical fashion garment. However, there's more. And this is going to involve me going slightly more into the mechanisms behind NFTs, but I'm going to do this at a very, very high level. So the first thing that NFTs facilitate, because they are on the blockchain, is that they can really empower creatives. I think there are two very important ways that they can do this. First of all, this idea of exposure. And this idea of exposure is relating to the fact that the fashion industry has had a pretty severe trademark or copyright problem where both in terms of luxury goods from high-end brands being infringed upon, but also, especially recently in this space, there have been luxury brands taking designs from young designers. When you store something on the blockchain, you are unable to modify it. It is stored concretely, transparently, forever. So if I was a fashion designer, I can put my design onto the blockchain. Let's say the date is the 13th of September. You will be able to see that I was the first one to log that design. And therefore, in terms of copyright infringement, it facilitates this new ability for ownership or creator rights to be immutable. The second element is this element of fair compensation. As I said before, blockchains are unchangeable, and they also allow you to program in specific functions which will operate over and over forever without the need for somebody to consistently check on them. And then one of the most interesting of these is a royalty mechanism. With the majority of NFTs, you can program in secondary royalties forever. So if I am an emerging designer, I can say 10% of every single sale of my item will come back to me. So I think this is very prominent and very important when it comes to the emerging fashion space, because you'll often have an item which begins at $200 but becomes coveted and maybe goes to $2,000, $20,000 in time. But the initial creator is never rewarded. This new mechanism allows creators to receive consistent reimbursement for the work that they do and what they create. And the final thing around this fair compensation mechanism is digital fashion really has the ability to cut out the middlemen. So one of the things that really brought me in was the fact that currently we operate in a fashion industry which is highly gated. In order to break in, you need, first of all, a very large initial sum of money to be able to produce your designs, to be able to have materials, to be able to have a studio, etc. And then you also need this idea of access to specific stores, to specific individuals in the fashion industry in order to get that access and exposure. With digital fashion, you need little more than the cost of a computer and digital design software, and you can create your designs online. use ORL technology or URL to get them onto either somebody like me or a digital avatar in a game. And then from there, you can build up your career, you can make sales. And that's also exactly what blockchain technology facilitates. You have platforms which are middleman less. So platforms which instead of buyers may take 1%, 2% of these fees, which is really going to bring in an entirely new generation of designers from all over the world who can receive fair compensation for their work and are incentivized to work as a result. The second type is advanced customer connections. When somebody buys something on the blockchain, you have access or the ability to see what's known as their wallet, which is a proprietary address that belongs to them. Once you have access, you can give these customers new opportunities, new loyalty rewards, or even specific access to events based on this ability to track whether or not they're holding an asset. So 2 examples of this I'm going to draw on is, first of all, what's known as an airdrop. So an airdrop is when a company within the NFT space says, Dani is one of my first consumers. I've seen her loyalty. I've seen that she's held this good for 2 years, let's say. And I therefore will reward her by sending her an additional digital good into her wallet. And this has really proliferated within the NFT space as a way of making consumers feel rewarded for how long they've held a good, their loyalty to the product, the loyalty to the brand, etc. The second type that's interesting is this idea of access. With NFTs, you have the ability, as I said before, to really validate whether or not somebody is a loyal holder of your good. And increasingly, there are these experiences where only holders of a specific good or product can access digital or real life experiences. Artifact, which is the sneaker brand which recently got acquired by Nike, through an incredible party in New York, which only Artifact holders could access. You can imagine extrapolating this in the physical world, and especially in the fashion world, to having only specific holders who have held things for specific amounts of time, being able to access private sales, to be able to access fashion weeks, to be able to access parties. So Web3 and NFTs gives an entirely new ability to connect with your consumer. Finally, the third point is this idea of the financialization of fashion. Fashion has traditionally not been seen as an investment. You have specific platforms like StockX and the sneaker world where shoes are traded and bought and sold like investable assets, but in the widest capacity possible. Fashion is not seen as an investable asset, it's seen as a consumer good. Something that I find fascinating about digital fashion is that you have the ability to move and make that transition. And I think one of the most considerable reasons for that is that digital fashion does not experience wear and tear. So when you have an art piece, the way you experience that art piece is you hang it on your wall. And so you can assume that if unless you're very unlucky, there isn't going to be a lot of damage to it. Whereas the way you experience a fashion item is most often by wearing it. And so every single time you experience that item, it experiences wear and tear and it goes down in value. With digital fashion, these factors are not present. So you have this idea of traceability. So you can see who's owned it. You can see the experiences that they have, which, as we've seen from the vintage market, can add to the value of an asset or item, but with none of the physical degradation or scarring. And so that, on a very base level, allows for digital fashion to become a monetizable good in a new way that fashion in the physical space has never been able to. And that very briefly brings me on to what I'm building. So DRAUP is a platform maximizing the value of digital fashion for creators and consumers. And so all of the things that I said above, this idea that digital fashion currently cannot be worn to express your identity while simultaneously having the abilities to be owned, to be monetized, to be modified, and to be able to be transferred. That's one of the first things that we're dealing with. So on this platform, you'll be able to buy the latest, coolest, digitally native creators, empowered and from everywhere in the world. You'll be able to see them in a virtual closet space. And from that virtual closet space, you'll be able to port them onto yourself, onto your avatar in a game, onto your picture for profile on Twitter, to give you this cohesive digitally native identity, which I think is one of the core things we need for digital fashion to move forward and to become mass market. Once those mechanisms are in place and you are wearing your digital fashion wherever you would like, there's also this ability to monetize it. So obviously you can resell it to others, but actually you can take that one step further. So you can rent out your digital fashion. So let's say I have an incredible drop item in my closet. I can send it into somebody else's closet and be automatically paid back in the royalty mechanism that I previously said to you for every hour it's held by somebody else or for every time that they wear it. I can also have programmed in the ability for that garment to be returned to me after a specific period of time. So that's one of the things we're going to be focusing on rolling out. The second thing we're going to be focusing on rolling out is this idea of where to earn. So as I said before, digital fashion allows for this new realm of consumer loyalty. With where to earn, a brand can say, okay, there are 1,000 of my items in different people's virtual closets. There is an event where I want 100, 150, 200 people to be wearing this item. I am going to make it so that for every hour somebody wears this item, they are paid automatically by us for wearing that. And for me, that's what I see as the future of the influencer economy. This idea that reimbursement is programmable, and it's not only limited to influencers with 50,000, 100,000 followers. It can be accessible to everyone. And again, obviously, part of what facilitates that is the fact that these clothes don't have to be shipped around the globe. They don't have to be produced, nor do you have to have specific tracking, which you're consistently focused on because it's all automated. So finally, coming on to how everyone can interact with this. As I said before, it's still a hyper nascent industry. So there's a lot of experimentation going on. And I think the one thing that I want to stress is for both consumers and creators and brands, there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all solution. What's very important when looking at the next generation of fashion and looking into Web3 is really thinking about how it aligns with the brand that you've built and the values that you've assigned to that brand over time. So digital fashion and Web3, for example, it's hyper democratized. Creator reimbursement is very important. This isn't the idea that it's a centralized platform where only a few people benefit. So first of all, it's checking if the way that you've presented aligns with that. And if not, really thinking of ways to bring other people in and reimburse them fairly. That being said, there is such a wide range of ways you can engage, be that as a physical fashion brand that stays physical, but maybe has customer loyalties or perks based on the blockchain, based on Web3, to being a fully digitally native brand, which obviously facilitates this access to an entirely new generation of consumers who are these 220 million monthly active users on platforms like Roblox. So when going into this industry, I think one of the most important things is to educate yourself, to really understand which elements speak to you and to be experimental. And similarly as a consumer, what's very exciting is digital fashion allows an entirely new way to experiment with who you are digitally. But that might be on your Instagram, or it might be creating an entirely new persona from scratch. One of the most important things to be consistently aware of as both the consumer and a brand is that this industry has not been developed. The stakes have not been set yet. And so being experimental, or not necessarily knowing who or what you are in this realm, is completely normal. And really going down the rabbit hole and allowing other people to speak to you with humility about how this industry will change and what your place within it is. Thank you so much for listening. And I now want to open for the last 5 minutes to any questions anyone might have.
Hey, Dani. Oh, that was wonderful. That was great. Thank you so much. For me, especially, and I've been a part of the 3D Tech Festival and Alphanon for several years, and you were also, I don't know if our our watchers and audience know this, but you were very heavily involved in last year. And I want to plug your talk from last year's. How can the metaverse, your session, which you led, it was a panel discussion. How can the metaverse offer new possibilities for apparel designers and creators? And you led that with Leanne Elliott-Young from the Institute of Digital Fashion, Steffi Fung, and Regina Turbina. That's on our YouTube if you'd like to go back and watch that ahead of tomorrow or anything. And there was also a lot of talk in your session right now about the metaverse and Web3 and stuff. And there was a great talk from last year as well by Yat Su, who is the CEO of Animoca Brands. And that video was called, or his session was titled, "Are We Ready to Live in the Metaverse?" And I think both of those videos would be great complements to what you talked about today. And, I really loved like the practical applications that you had to present about kind of like all this NFT stuff, which is like a horrible lack of a better word. But I think a lot of people got caught up in kind of like the Bored Ape, Yacht Club, stuff like that. But you were able to just really present some really tangible benefits to it. Not even just for the designers, but you're looking in a way to kind of pass on ways to pay them and stuff. And I think that's really wonderful. So thank you again. We did have a bunch of questions come in. This first question came in from Bianca Vasquez. How can someone enter the digital fashion space with no experience? What should we be focusing on? Augmented reality development, design, whatever.
So I think that's a really great question. And kind of as I kind of concluded the talk, I think it's really to do with assessing who your consumer is, where they're going to wear their digital fashion, and what is most native to you. So AR, for example, if you go onto Snap, they have really interesting developer kits that can allow digital fashion to be worn on real life, which can engage your physical consumer in a very interesting way. And I would definitely recommend looking to Snap for that. I think, Bianca, what I'll also mention is at the moment, resources around this are hyper decentralized. So a lot of creators are learning literally from YouTube how to do this. And I think that has also led to this very vibrant community of people really helping each other out. So look up Steffi Fung, look up Leanne Elliott-Young, both of whom are doing courses around this. Steffi is more digital design focused. But before going in, really look at who your consumer is and who you're looking to wear the fashion, and then you can move forward into which digital fashion mechanism is right for you.
That's great. I think that, as somewhat of a content creator myself, definitely not in apparel or anything like that, but the power in finding other influencers, from macro to micro influencers is really wonderful. There's a apparel designer that I follow, Don Allen III, who I love. I'm not even in it, but I really love him because he's so really very down to earth, and one day he'll just start a live of him kind of messing around with, an old Xbox. I've even forgot what it was called, but like this kind of virtual reality, augmented reality camera that Xbox came out with, and he's just messing around with it in his living room. So the power of kind of micro all the way up to macro influencers is really always helps me get to start. It's the first place I turn to is influencers and hashtags, So there's another question that came in from Fer Martinelli. Seems it was kind of piggybacking on another comment from another user, but how is digital fashion addressing its externalities, like bullying, for example, mental health, financial impact? And, is it addressing any of these things?
So I think that's such a brilliant question, because I think it is such an extreme problem. Default culture I've always found very fascinating as a sociological phenomenon, but obviously it is hyper problematic. One of the things that I think digital fashion facilitates, which is hyper advantageous, is this idea that you are not wedded to your physical form, and also the fact that you can access the industry at a much lower price point. So this idea of being able to create an identity from nothing, whilst I'm in no way saying that it addresses problems with cyberbullying, because it doesn't, and that's something that we need to, as an industry, really focus on, it allows you to create yourself in a far more free-form way, and it's been shown to actually have a positive mental health impact in terms of expression of identity. A similar thing around price point. Rather than luxury fashion being thousands or hundreds of dollars, you can exist within these realms for, let's say, $7, $8, $20, which democratizes this idea of luxury, which democratizes self-expression. But I agree there is a really fundamental problem, which as in our physical world needs to be addressed, around the more negative microcosms which spin up amongst the industry. And I think increasingly there are efforts towards this, but exactly as it's 2 years old, there is still a colossal way to go.
I think we have time for maybe just one more question. Does Web3, as applied to fashion, does Web3 present the same sustainability dilemma, consumption of energy and stuff like that, as crypto, which is super timely right now with the merging of Ethereum 2.0 and stuff?
So Linda, that's a great question. I think such a pertinent question, exactly as you said, to address right now. So first of all, simply, yes, there is an extreme environmental impact. It is not close to being as extreme as the environmental impact that the fashion industry traditionally has, where it's 10% of the world's entire carbon emissions, more than the airline and marine industries combined. However, obviously, this use of servers and all of the accompanying technologies is environmentally impactful in a negative sense. Very quickly to touch on the blockchain element. Blockchain and the most prevalent blockchains at the moment use a large quantity of energy because of their consensus mechanism, aka the ways in which they put transactions through. At the moment, Ethereum, which is the largest blockchain that these goods and assets are created on, operates on something called proof of work, where you have a ton of computers all competing to solve a puzzle, and whichever one solves the puzzle first, and with that, the accompanying energy, which is now absolutely colossal, puts the transaction through and gets a reward. So currently Ethereum uses the same amount of electricity as Argentina, or has the same quantity of emissions, which is absolutely colossal. However, this week, they are moving to a different protocol called proof of stake. And there are already other blockchains which operate on this more sustainable protocol. So instead of all of these computers competing to solve a specific transaction, one computer will be selected based on staking a certain amount of cryptocurrency to solve a transaction. This will reduce the amount of energy and the emissions colossally. And I think that also relates to a larger point where, although there is a lack of sustainability within the wider technology used to underpin this industry, the speed of change and the speed of movement towards sustainability is far faster, and because we're dealing with technology instead of physical production, is able to be far faster than we're ever going to see in the physical fashion space. So I think these problems, whilst they exist, are going to be consistently remedied at a very high speed. And the final point to make around that is that a lot of people who went into the digital fashion industry did so because of sustainability or ethics concerns in the physical fashion industry. And therefore, there's going to be even more of a push to remedy these problems.
Great. I think that's about as comprehensive of an answer as we could have asked for. Unfortunately, I see the numbers dropping off. I know it's late in the day here on the East Coast, and especially towards the East and stuff, it's even later. I think that's all the time we have questions for. Dani, again, thank you so much. I think this is such a wonderful session. You're so knowledgeable, and we just thank you so much for your time.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So that was day one. Thank you all so much for joining us. There were I think, over 350 people joined us at different times. And thank you all so much. It was really wonderful. And thank you to all the speakers again. I do hope you join us tomorrow for day 2 of the 2022 3D Tech Festival. Building a brand for everybody and anybody, which is all about the importance of and why regarding inclusivity. We're going to open the day with speakers from Harvard Business School, the Digitals, who's been highlighted every 3D Tech Festival as well, and differently enabled. Today's session, the recording of today's live stream, will be available immediately for rewatch on our YouTube channel, along with the other sessions that I mentioned from last year. Individual session recordings will be available on 3dtechfest.com starting Friday, September 16th. you can register, sign up for an account, and access those starting Friday after the conclusion of the festival. Get notified for tomorrow's and Thursday's sessions by heading over to our YouTube profile. Be sure to subscribe to us. You can navigate to our video section and take a look at the upcoming live streams. There's a little gray box there that says notify me to be notified when we go live over the next 2 days. I think that's everything for me. Thank you all so much again, and we'll see you tomorrow.